Today we are hopefully going to finish the topic of tznius. We're going to jump right in. We covered last week, I believe we ended off with discussion of how tznius applies to men. We talked about that basically there are the same rules and guidelines about tznius for men as there are for women, with a few exceptions, as I'll get to today. So we're going to, in other words, they have the same they have to have the same, dignity and refinement when it comes to dress, when it comes to speech, when it comes to actions, etc., etc., etc. They're also not allowed to be too provocative in the way they dress and the way they act, etc. So now we're going to delve right into how tznius applies to women in terms of dress. We talked about speech, we talked about actions. Now we get down to the nitty-gritty of those elbows and knees having to be covered. So I think I mentioned last week, I'll repeat again, there are 3 sources of laws for women's dress when it comes to tznius. The first source is something called Dat Moshe, which literally means the laws from Moshe, from Moses. And these are laws that will not change because of time or custom or fashion or what most women are doing at the time. These are Torah origin laws. The only law from this source is women's hair covering after marriage, that a married woman has to cover her hair. That's the only law that has its source in Dat Moshe, in the original Torah laws. Okay, it's what we call a doraisa from the Torah. The second category of the source for laws for dress for women is called Dat Yehudis, Dat Yehudit, literally meaning the laws of the Jewish woman. Now these again do not have a source, written source from the Torah itself. They are the standards and customs adopted by Jewish women above and beyond what the Torah says. It's connected to custom, it's connected to what everybody does. And these are also obligatory laws, and they have the status of law. Rashi says Dat Yehudis is customs of Jewish women, even though they aren't written. Okay, these standards do vary by time and place. Okay, Dat Yehudit laws vary by time and place. For example, the standards of ancient times in terms of dress is not going to be the standard of 1600 Spain, nor will it be the standard of 1899 England, nor will it be the standard of today. I'll give you 2 examples of how of laws of Dat Yehudis that would change. Again, remember that Dat Yehudis laws also to some extent are going to depend on the standards of secular society. I'll give you an example. In the turn of the century, England or America, it was the standard for a woman to wear a floor-length skirt, or at least an ankle-length skirt. To reveal even as much as an ankle would have been considered scandalous, right? Now we know that we didn't cover it yet here, but we know that today the standard of dress for a woman is to wear a skirt that covers her knee. That's the minimum requirement. But even a standard like that, which today we say is fine, would not have been okay in 1899 England or America. Turn of the century, Victorian standards were actually higher. So back then, the standard of dress would have had to be floor-length skirts or dresses. You understand? So that's an example of how it can change in this case to the more lenient, right? Another example that is from the Torah, it's a very interesting example. In the story of when Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, goes to find a wife for Yitzchak, Abraham's son, he takes with him lots of jewelry to give as a gift to this woman who will eventually marry Yitzchak. When he meets Rivka and decides this is the one that is appropriate for Yitzchak, he gives her the jewelry. Among the pieces of jewelry he gives her is a nose ring. Okay, is a nose ring. So from there we learn that was a very typical ornamentation that women would wear as a customarily wear. So it was absolutely fine for Rivka to wear a nose ring. In today's world, a nose ring is not an acceptable ornament. It's not an acceptable piece of jewelry. What?
Unless you're a cow.
Unless you're a cow. Okay. it would stand out. It would be considered what is beyond the realm of acceptable, refined, right, jewelry. And so that's another example of the standards changing. Back then it was absolutely acceptable, and now today it's not. So dat Yehudis are these sometimes fluctuating standards of the way that women generally dress. And they do change with the times, but they do have the status of law. Okay? The third category of the source of laws is even more changeable and more subject to traditions within communities, and that is called minhag makom, literally traditions of the place. What this means is that even within Orthodox communities, you will have a large range of ways of dressing and customs, and what is considered appropriate, what is considered not appropriate. There is very little homogeneity here. You're not going to be in danger, really, if you go to any other community and you're dressed in a certain, in appropriate to the standards of the general Orthodox community. You're not going to have that much, variation from community to community. But there are a few items. I'll give you an example. There are some Hasidic communities or there are some Israeli communities as well, where women are not allowed to wear wigs. They're not considered appropriate. They're not considered tznius. They're not considered nice and refined, especially today's wigs. And I'll touch on I remember Lisa's question. I'm going to deal with Lisa's question more. Another example. So even though I'm wearing a wig, and most American communities allow wigs for women, if I was to go into a community that did not think it was appropriate for the women of that community to wear a wig, I would not want to go into that community wearing a wig. I would wear whatever they are deemed appropriate: scarves, hats, snoods, etc. Another example is in a lot of Hasidic communities, you'll see the women wearing stockings with a line, seamed stockings. That is considered to be the only appropriate clothing on the leg to cover the leg. A seamed stocking, yeah. And that is I think it was originally to delineate the fact that the woman was wearing a covering on her leg, because stockings very often can hide the fact that she's covering her leg, right? The colors, it can be you have sheer stockings that sometimes don't, right? So there are communities where the women wear only seamed stockings. There are communities where people don't wear red, and that's not a law. It's just a custom. There are certain towns in Eretz Yisrael where the women do not wear makeup, because they consider that to be inappropriate and too loud and too attracting and too alluring. And so there again is a variation in a community. Then you have a question of what color stockings. Some communities say black stockings are only black stockings are okay. Others say that flesh-colored stockings would be all right. There are some communities where jean skirts are not considered appropriate. They're considered too much of a style of the non-Jews, of the Gentiles, and I'll get into that in a few minutes. So that's the third sort of variation on the laws is minhag makom, the tradition of a specific place. Again, you're not going to have most places, or they're not going to demand that when you enter this community that you dress exactly like them. Like you can go into Hasidic shul and you're wearing certain style of shade, your own style of shade. They're not going to look askance, but it's just the idea is that you should be sensitive to these things. And if you know you're going into a community that does things a little bit differently, the idea is you want to adopt, if you're living there, or you're going to be staying there for a while, you should adopt that custom. It does not, by the way, apply to lower standards. In other words, if you're going into let's say a more modern community, and you have a certain standard of, let's say, covering your legs, in other words, wearing socks or stockings, and they do not, it doesn't work to lower. In other words, you shouldn't lower your standards to get along in that particular group. It works to raise standards, okay? Okay, so that's dat Yehudis. So those are the three sources of the laws. So what are the actual laws? So basically, as I told you before, there's very little in terms of, it feels like like there's so much attention paid to women and how they have to dress. But when you come right down to it, the fact of the matter is that halachos, laws about tznius dress for women, are very few and very, just very basic. There are three basic guidelines: covering the knee to the knee, the leg to the knee, covering the arm to the elbow, and covering the torso to the collarbone. And that's it. That's it. That's it. I'm going to get into all of these, where these guidelines come from. Okay, so the neck issue, the collarbone issue, is that the torso is obviously considered a private. Considered a private part of the body. It is considered a nakedness on either male or female, and therefore you have to cover the torso. So the question then would be, where does the torso end? The neck is also allowed to be shown. Where does the neck end? And so the general consensus would be that the neck ends at the collarbone, and also at the sides the neck would end where the curve of the neck ends. Where it starts to even out is the end of the neck. So that's why the collarbone was decided on as a general idea of where the neck ends and where the torso begins. Okay, so that's pretty simple. The knee issue. The knee issue comes from, why is the knee the cutoff point of the leg? Because the Gemara talks about the shok, which is generally, traditionally defined as, translated as the thigh, as being the part of the body that is not supposed to be shown. It's the thigh. Therefore, again, the question is, where does the thigh end? At the knee. And therefore, the knee would have to be covered. Okay, pretty simple. The arm, the elbow issue, where does that delineation, that boundary come from? There is a discussion in the Gemara about a woman who is deserving of being, or can be, divorced by her husband because she weaves in the marketplace. And the Gemara talks about the issue of this activity of doing some weaving would mean that her arms are moving in such a way that it's possible that she could raise her arms and thus expose her upper arm. And so therefore, from this source, they learned that the upper arm is not allowed to be exposed. Therefore, again, the boundary of the upper arm would be the elbow. So that's it. Elbow, collarbone, knee. That's basically it. That's basically it, okay? The foot and the leg is debatable as to whether or not one has to cover it. In other words, the calf, I should say the calf and the foot. There are communities that say that one should cover it, and there are communities that say it's fine not to. The issue of a man saying Kriya Shema in front of nakedness, that this is the majority of the issues having to deal of the laws having to deal with tznius in terms of how someone is dressed. Really, the main thrust of those laws have to do with a man being able to say Kriya Shema or not being able to say Kriya Shema, because there's an issue that of a man not being able to recite Shema if he is in the front of nakedness, erva, what's called erva. Even his own, by the way, not just a woman's, another man, his own naked, anybody's nakedness. So the question arises about the calf and the leg, and the majority of opinions rule leniently about this. So, but again, there is debate about whether or not that's allowed. In certain communities, it's absolutely not done. It's not the custom to go without a stocking covering your foot, your calf, and in some communities, it's absolutely fine. Yes.
For a man, is the torso also extending the waist from the woman?
So the actual guidelines in terms of the elbow, collarbone, and knee, those cutoffs are not exactly the same for a man as for a woman. In terms of the torso, I believe that you could say so. The upper arm for a man is not an issue. The thigh for a man is generally not an issue, except in shul, because there is a discussion about whether or not a man who's wearing shorts even a man who's wearing shorts. So actually, it's not even a matter of the thigh. It's a matter of covering even below the thigh for a man. So there's a question as to whether a man who's wearing shorts in shul should be allowed to be called up to the Torah, to say a bracha on the Torah, etc., to be a reader, or to be a leader, a prayer leader. So there's a question even there of tznius for a man, as something lacking in kavod tzibor, the honor of the congregation, does not really allow for, should not really allow for someone who's improperly dressed. So even for a man, when it comes to the leg in shul, at least, there is this issue of being properly covered up. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, you brought up that a person doesn't even daven in front of his
Right. So
naked.
what is considered nakedness for a man in case of Shema? That I'm not exactly sure about. I'm not exactly sure. Does it mean that?
It's not all daven. Like, let's say a man is wearing something where his torso is not completely covered, just to say a blessing before he drinks his water.
Again, I'm not exactly sure what the definition of nakedness erva is for a man when it comes to saying Shema. I would guess that it is partially the thigh, because there's this issue in shul about whether or not a man could have an honor in shul if he's wearing shorts, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Don't quote me on that. I'll ask and I'll get back to you. In terms of the torso, it probably has to do with the torso. It's some part of it, obviously. But but I'm not sure where exactly those parameters for a man are. Okay.
So if a person is saying a prayer and somebody else in the room, male or female, is not completely covered, that man would turn or close his eyes?
I'm not sure. He should, if possible, leave the room.
Leave the room.
If possible, leave the room, or have the other person leave the room. Otherwise, turn away. If he can't leave the room, turn away, or close his eyes. That would be, I think, acceptable as well.
So in the shul, is there such a thing as saying your chest isn't completely covered?
For a man? That a man's chest or a woman's?
Yeah, if a man's chest is not completely covered and he comes into a shul, is there such a thing as the man in the room shouldn't be down?
I don't think that there's ever an issue in a shul, because I'm hard pressed to think of a case where a man would be inappropriately dressed in a shul, even if he's wearing a t-shirt. There isn't a short sleeve t-shirt, again, which is a different issue of dignified dress in shul. Mostly you will not see a man come to shul in shorts, because there's this feeling that you want to be dressed in a dignified way when you come to daven. But even if he is coming in shorts and a short sleeve t-shirt, let's say, there is no issue of the upper arm for a man. I don't think that's considered nakedness for a man. In terms of displaying the chest, I don't recall ever seeing these days, anytime past 1979, where the guy had his shirt open to the third button. I don't recall seeing something like that. So it's certainly not the style. Whether or not that would be considered nakedness, again, I don't know. I don't know. It's very possible there might be a case like that where, but I don't know when it comes to, and the issue is only Shema. I don't know what those parameters are. I will have to get back to you on that when it comes to nakedness for a man. It's only the Kriya Shema that is the issue, apparently. Yeah. Okay. There are, in addition to all these parameters of dress, we are told that there's a Talmudic statement that sees the color red as immodest. It's not halacha, and custom varies. I had my best friend in high school was not allowed to wear red. Her father said it was not appropriate. But there are plenty of Orthodox women who do wear red. So again, it's a custom, not a halacha. And again, the bottom line is, as we've said before, and it's a very difficult way of putting it, but it has to be a very, I know it when I see it kind of a feel. It's a spirit of the law. It's not just about the knee length, the skirt length to the knee. If you're wearing a knee length skirt, but the skirt is so tight that basically, nothing is hidden from view, as it were, that is not considered a tznius, a modest dress. you have to know that, you have to sort of feel what the spirit of the law is, not just the letter of the law. And again, I'll quote Edith Head, who was a famous Hollywood costume designer, and she said, your dresses should be tight enough to show that you're a woman, but loose enough to show that you're a lady. Which I think is an interesting way of putting it. Okay. Now, I want to get to the question, a question that I think is on a lot of our minds. I haven't heard it so far yet, I don't think, which is the question of why women seem to be the focus of tznius, right? There's no books out there for men addressing their issues of having to be tznius, even though I said, and it's true, that when it comes to how to act, how to speak, how to interact with the opposite sex, men as well as women have to comport themselves tznius, with a modest way of acting. But despite that, it seems that women seem to be more associated with this quality. The question is why? Okay. Did it occur to you, that question? No? Didn't bother you? Okay, a little bit. I mean, it's like, it seems to be a universal issue. It seems to be, despite the fact that it's a universal issue, it seems to be that women are more associated. So I want to talk about a few reasons why this would be. The first thing that I want to say is that if you look around the world, and if you look at just people even on the street, you look at people at work, men and women at work, you'll notice that there seems to be a double standard when it comes to what men and women how they're expected to dress. Women are encouraged, right, and expected to dress in a way that highlights their physical beauty. They're encouraged to emphasize their bodies. Men are not. They're not encouraged to do this. Men are not encouraged or expected to wear tight shirts. They're all dressed in suits, right? Look around you. Even men who are dressed not in suits, they're dressed in t-shirts or button-down shirts. None of them are emphasizing anybody, unless you're like a He-Man and you really want to show off your pecs. But this is the exception to the rule. So what this means is that men who are already holding to the laws of tznius, they're invisible, right? In other words, the secular society standards for how men should dress are not very different from Judaism's, from those of Judaism. Our standards for how men should dress happen to coincide with the way that most secular men happen to dress. Certainly if you're going to work, they're dressed in a suit, or at least in a pants and a shirt. All right, that happens to fit very well with our idea of tznius dress for men. So therefore, he's not going to stand out if he's dressed appropriately. Whereas, if you see in the summertime a woman wearing a long skirt and a long sleeve shirt, she's going to stand out. You're going to notice that she's dressed tznius. But you're not going to ever see a guy in a halter top. There isn't that sort of choice for him. You may see him in a t-shirt, but then we don't really think very highly of men who walk around in t-shirts, right? So they're pretty much already dressed tznius. And if you think about the variety of clothing available to men and women, again, men are very limited. They have shirts, they have t-shirts, that's about it. Think about the choices of sleeve lengths for men. It's long sleeve, short sleeve, that's about it. But women, if you think about the choices of sleeve lengths for women, there's much more choices. There's long sleeves, there's 3/4 sleeves, there's elbow length, there's short sleeves, there's cap sleeves, there's sleeveless, there's spaghetti straps, there's halter tops. There's all these choices. And so, and again, I think that in this society, women are encouraged to present themselves, or they feel that they need to present themselves in an external way to get self-affirmation, to get approval from other women and men. And so they're more encouraged to dress in ways that are not what we would consider appropriate or tzniustic. Again, women therefore stand out if they're dressed in a tznius way. Men are not standing out. So that would be the first answer I would give you to that, why do women seem to be the focus of tznius. Another reason has to do with biology. Okay, so we know that as I've said before, both men and women are required, actually, not encouraged, but required to not incite passions of the other gender, right? Men and women should not excessively beautify themselves. Men and women should not excessively pay attention to styles and fads of the secular world, etc. Why? Because we both have a responsibility to not pose a distraction to the other gender. Okay? This is fair. Yes, no, it doesn't seem fair, but it is, because again, in our worldview, which holds that we all have responsibilities and no rights, then I have a responsibility to help you not come to sin. The mitzvah from the Torah, Lifnei Iver lo sitein michshal, before a blind person, don't put a stumbling block. And we understand this to mean that I shouldn't do anything that will cause you to stumble or literally fall, or in terms of doing a mitzvah or not doing a mitzvah. It means making other people more important than yourself. Now, if we believe that God created us to be attractive to others, that means that I have a responsibility to not present myself in a way that is going to detract from my attractiveness, but add to my attractingness, right? I have a responsibility to use that attractiveness correctly and in the right place in the right time. Now, we also don't ignore the fact that men and women are biologically different. We believe, right, that men are visual creatures. And it's not fair for us to ask them to ignore their natures. They are more visually stimulated than women are. And if we believe that, then by logical extension, the onus, the responsibility of the mitzvah of lo lifnei iver lo sitein michshal falls on us. Right? Because more of my body is more generally arousing than a man's body would be for me, a woman who is not a visually stimulated creature. So then the responsibility does fall a little bit more on the woman. Fair? Sounds fair, no?
Absolutely.
Okay. Remember also that there is more of a real danger when it comes to this issue of being attracted to the opposite sex that men have. Men there's the danger of what we call hirhurim, lustful thoughts, that men need to try to avoid. Why? For one reason, there is a mitzvah from the Torah that warns them against spilling seed, okay, to be graphic about it. And this means that they have to try to avoid things that will bring them, right, to the wrong actions. Therefore, again, if I understand the worldview that I'm living in to be that I have a responsibility to help others, men and women, to do the right thing, then I also have more of a responsibility to not say something like, well, it's his problem. It's only his problem. Let him not look at me. Okay? I have the responsibility to have the opposite kind of attitude and say, well, I'm not going to deny who I am. I'm not going to shut down my expression of myself, but I'm not going to make myself so alluring and so attracting so that I'm definitely putting a stumbling block in front of someone else. I'll give you an example from my own history. I used to wear only hats as opposed to wigs. There was a time I wore hats. It was in the summertime, actually. And I would always wear hats for Shabbos and shul. And one week I had what's called a fall, which is like a half wig. It basically means that you wore it under a hat. And I decided one Shabbos to wear a fall with the hat. So it looked like it was basically a wig under the hat. It looked like I had hair coming out from under the hat. But it wasn't my hair, it was a wig. I wore it to shul, and I got some looks from the men's side, because they had seen me only in hats. And I guess they had assumed that I was an Orthodox Rebbitzin. I wouldn't, obviously. But now they saw me with what looked to them like hair under my hat. In other words, it wasn't a whole wig. If I had come in just a wig, they would have made the assumption it's a wig. But because I was wearing a hat on top of the fall, I think they thought it was really my hair. And I felt very uncomfortable. And I realized that even though it was absolutely halachically okay for me to wear a fall under a hat, right? I could have even continued to do so. The level of attention that I was getting indicated to me that I should go back to wearing my hats without the fall. because it was posing too much of a distraction. I was seeing their minds working. Oh, she's wearing a hat with her hair. I've never seen that. I can't believe it. Chaya Nebel would. So I realized it was too much. Now, I could have very well said to myself, let them deal with this. I'm not doing anything wrong. But there is a responsibility that I felt to not, first of all, I didn't want to be the source of attention for them, like in that way. I didn't want to be looked at while I was trying to daven on Shabbos or whatever it was, even during Kiddush. So there is that sense of, I want to present myself in an appropriate way. And again, I could have continued to wear the fall without any halachic issues, but I didn't want to be the source of attention on a physical level. And I just decided to go back to wearing the hats, and that was it. I didn't get any other stairs. So again, there's this idea of responsibility. Okay, it again doesn't mean that we believe that we have to be as modest as possible, because if we believe that we have to be as modest as possible, we'd wear the burqa. The Torah does not have a tradition of having women wear a burqa. So therefore, again, and we're not, the idea is not to anonymize, if that's a verb, women, to make them anonymous, to make them invisible, right? The message in Muslim communities where the woman wears the head to toe outfit covered completely is, you are causing me, a man, to look at you, and it's your responsibility. No, we don't have that opinion, right? The man has responsibility to not be distracted by me, but at the same time, I do have a responsibility to not to distract him by being too flashy, too stylish, too alluring. And again, it's very subjective and very spirit of the law, guidelines here, makeup that is attractive, but at the same time not too much, etc., etc. And the same could be said of clothing styles, can be said of wigs, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, etc. Okay, so that's another reason why it seems that women do have more of a responsibility here. There's another reason third reason that has to do with the society we live in. In this society, in the secular society we live in, men tend to objectify women. Okay, and women, as a result, suffer from an external self-definition. So therefore, women have the onus of combating this, and tznius helps with this. And let me explain what I mean. Think about the world we live in today. Girls are taught to value themselves and how they present themselves externally. If you think about magazine ads, magazine articles, television commercials, makeover shows. You think about all of the message is to girls and women. The message is, you need to focus on the externals to be beautiful. Get rid of the facial hair, get rid of the leg hair, get rid of the flab, get rid of the pimples, moisturize your skin, moisturize your follicles, get rid of the dead end, condition your hair, get rid of the cellulite. It's all about improving your appearance on a physical level. There's a great song by Shania Twain, a country singer. It's called "What a Way to Wanna Be." And it's bemoaning the fact that women in this culture have to sort of one up themselves on the physical. The lines go: moisturize, exercise, erase the rings around your eyes. Time to tone my thighs. Gotta lose another size. It's all about gotta do this. I have to do this. I have to exercise. Gotta get a copper tone tan. And a girl in this society, in this kind of atmosphere, first of all, girls are sexualized at a very young age. They're advertised to. They're made to compare themselves to models who are airbrushed, and to celebrities who have plastic surgery and are liposuctioned, etc. They are made to starve themselves into a body image that they feel is the way I have to go to be attractive, to be an attractive girl. So as a result, we see teens having plastic surgery. They're having nose jobs. Yeah, teenagers. They're having nose jobs. They're having liposuction. They're having other kind of jobs. She's growing up, a girl in the society. She's dressing for boys. Because she's dating socially, right? So she's measuring her self-worth on how popular with boys that she is. And in addition, in our society, sexuality has become so debased that a girl feels the need to flaunt herself more and more in order to feel desirable, in order to feel attractive. As opposed to, now contrast that to a girl who grows up in a Torah household. Right? From birth, she's taught that what matters is her midos, her character traits, and her actions. Okay, now girls of any age in any society care about their looks. I'm not saying that girls who grow up in a Torah society teenage girls don't care about their looks. I'm a mother of a teenage girl. I can tell you, every teenage girl cares about her looks. But it doesn't become an obsession. She doesn't go through spasms of anxiety in terms of choosing something that would look good on her, choosing something that, she's not dating boys socially, so she's not worried. That whole, world of looking good for other people is totally not there. The focus is internal. The focus is, what kind of person am I? What kind of midos am I developing? What kind of character traits am I developing? What kind, we're praising her for her good deeds. We're praising her for who she is inside. And so tznius thus has the advantage of combating this trend in secular society to objectify women, and it enables a girl to really develop a very strong sense of self. Okay, so by nurturing that internal value, that quality, the internals, she is focusing on that part of her that's within. She's not focusing on what's without, and does her nose look crooked, and does she have too many pimples today. And it's a wonderful way, tznius is a wonderful way of dealing with that, or not having to deal with that, rather, that focus on the externals that we see a lot in today's society, secular society. Now, I'm going to come to the fourth and final reason that it seems that women are connected to tznius. And indeed, they are, because, and for this answer, we go back now to the way that she was created. Okay, we talked a lot about tznius in the beginning of our discussion on tznius. We talked about how Adam and Chava were created without a sense of shame, because they had their internal and external were in unity together. They didn't have this embarrassment of being naked. We have to now go back to look at how God created Chava, how God created the first woman, in order to understand why woman especially has a special connection to the quality of tznius. Okay, because the way that she was created is going to tell us how she is going to be, how God wanted her to be. So now we go back to the story of creation. Okay, the story is, the verse says, Vayiven Hashem built. When it comes to telling us how Chava was created, it says, Vayiven Hashem built Chava. So the Gemara discusses this. It's also, Vayiven has also connection to the words Havin, Lahavin, Hitbonain, meaning thought about, thinking. So what does it mean? It means that Hashem thought about it. He gave thought to how am I going to create Chava? Why? Because how she's created is going to teach how she's going to be. It will dictate her nature and reflect her purpose in life. What is going to characterize a woman's essence that will lead her in the direction that she needs to go? So, the commentaries take us into Hashem's thinking, what he was thinking, quote unquote, as he was creating Chava. The commentary says, Gemara says, Hitbonain me'ayin levrata. He thought about where to create her from. What part of Adam is he going to separate her from and build her from? Which part of Adam shall I create Eve? Amar lo hibrata min harosh. I'm not going to create her from the head. I'm not going to take her from his head, because then she's going to be arrogant. If I create her from the head, she's going to think that she's going to maybe become a little bit arrogant. Okay, so what if then the analysis goes further? Hashem says, what about from his eye? Should I create Chava from Adam's eye? And Hashem says, no, it's not really good, because she's going to need to stick her nose into everybody's business. She's going to be too much of a spy. What about the ear? The Gemara continues. What about Hashem thinks? What about the ear? No, Hashem decides, because then she'll be a gossip. Okay, so the Gemara goes through all the parts of the body that Hashem reflected on. Should I take Chava from this? Should I take Chava from this? What about, it continues saying, what about the mouth? No, Hashem decides, because she'll be a dabarnit, she'll be a talker. Okay, what about from the heart? Sounds ideal. No, Hashem decides, lo min halev shelo tehei kantanit. If you misuse the power of emotion, it can become jealousy. She'll become jealous. So no. Again, he thinks about the hand. What about the hand? Should I create chava from the hand, etc., etc.? Should I create it from the feet? No, she'll walk arrogantly. Interestingly enough, Abarbanel also says Hashem decided not to create her from the hand of the feet of Adam, so that Adam shouldn't consider her beneath him. Okay, there was a lesson for Adam as well. Okay, but Hashem finally decides, where am I going to take it from? Mimakam shehut sanua ba'adam, from a place that is sanua, modest, private, hidden. And what is that part? The tzela, which is defined, translated in two ways. We don't know exactly which way it is. Either the rib or the side. Okay, either the rib or the side. So either of those things, they're covered and most private, because number one, you always have clothes covering your rib or your side, and also even when you are not dressed, it's still covered. The rib is internal. So therefore, he chose the rib, the tzela, the side, because it is the place that is most sanua, most modest, most private, most hidden, and he wanted Chava to have that character trait of tznius. Okay, so he says, it further says that as he created Chava, he was pleading with her. As he was forming every body part, he was pleading with every body part to hate sanua, be sanua, be modest, be private, because the question is why, right? So the question is why did God need Chava to be a tzanua, to have this character trait more than men of tznius, of privacy, of hiddenness, of internality? And the answer is that Hashem wanted, as we talked about this before, he wanted to move out of heaven and have a place on earth. He wanted to be among us. He is still hidden though, remember, right? His presence is hidden on earth. And she, as the tzanua, is going, tznius, the quality of tznius, hiddenness, is going to be what brings God down. We talked about the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, as the place, the first house of God, that his first dwelling on earth. And we're told that the first thing the Jews are ordered to make for the Mishkan are the curtains, the 10 curtains. Not the altar, not the menorah, not the ark, but the curtains. The message is that tznius is the necessary character trait, quality that God needs on earth in order to be here. So Chava has this job of bringing God down into the world through this quality of tznius. Okay? The feminine energy of tznius, that it guards that presence, God's presence, and it protects that. Okay, that's why, by the way, it says that a man without a wife has no bracha. Okay, and that's also why, kind of a similar idea, that it says that you should be very, in Gemara it tells a man that he has to be very scrupulous in the way that he honors his wife. Not because she irons your clothes, not because she makes you favorite, chocolates or cookies, but because without her, blessings don't come down. God's presence is not going to be completely available to you, because tznius is her project. The Maharal explains this a little bit. He says that tznius is an indicator of bracha, of blessing. He says because in every instance of bracha, you have an element of tznius, because things of lesser value don't have an internal aspect. Therefore, they're not worthy of bracha. But things that are important, that are essential, that are lofty, that are elevated, they all have an internal worth. They all have that element of tznius, they're concealed in some way, and therefore anything connected with tznius is an indicator of loftiness, and bracha comes down into your world. Okay, he further goes on to explain that this is connected to being created with the word vayiven, which we just said, that when God created Chava, he used the word vayiven, built. The Maharal says, what does it mean? He talks about the word being built. What does it mean to be built? What does it mean, a building? A building is, let's say, if you build a wall around a city, it protects the inside of the city. Same thing with a house. When you build a house, the building is defined by its walls, which protect what's on the inside, right? In a similar way, a woman is that vayiven, is that building that protects the internal. She protects the relationships in her family. Her domain is the internal domain, the private domain, the relationships between her and her husband, the relationship between her and her kids, between her kids and her, and in a larger way between her and the community, in community relationships as well. And so the midah of tznius is the essential midah that brings blessings into the world, that brings God into the world, and keeps him here. And in addition, you can say that Maharal goes on to say, I believe this is from Maharal, that just as a woman, when she in the reproductive stage, when she is nurturing a baby inside, it has, it's developing and growing in her. She is the nurturer in that case. She is creating a wall, a barrier, a protective barrier that protects that growing fetus. So too, she does the same thing for holiness on earth. She does the same thing for her family, but she also does that for God's presence on earth as well. And if you think about it, a further analogy would be that if we're understanding Selah, the part that she was created from, to mean rib, then think about the purpose of a rib as well. The purpose of a rib is to protect the vital organs inside the body. So if she's created from the rib, we have another clue to the importance of the woman's job of protecting the internal realm, protecting the lifeblood of the body. Okay. By the way, there's an interesting story that proves, in a way, the point of the story, I believe, is to prove the innateness of tznius in a woman's nature. And that is a story, I'm not sure if you've heard of it or not. The story of when the Queen of Sheba, Malchus Sheva, the Queen of Sheba came to visit King Solomon. And there are many stories about their interaction. She presented King Solomon, with a test. She said, I want to challenge you to pick out the boys from the girls. And what she did was, she had boys and girls of various ages, I guess, dressed alike and cut their hair the same, and they were all dressed in robes, and they're all dressed exactly alike. And she lined them up in front of King Solomon and said, pick out the girls from the boys. It was a challenge to what was perceived to be his great wisdom. King Solomon, had nuts brought in to the girls and the boys, and had them put on the floor in front of all the girls and the boys, and said to them, go ahead, you're free to take these nuts or candies or whatever they were. The boys, what they did was they crouched down, and the boys lifted the bottoms of their robes to make a sort of a bowl out of the hems of the skirt and the skirts, and put the nuts in there. The girls didn't do this. The girls didn't lift the bottom of the skirts. The girls took they went and found some other implement to use, and they used a separate kerchief. Maybe it was a hair kerchief. They untied their hair, whatever it was. But they had this inherent knowledge that lifting the bottom of my skirt is not appropriate, is not tznius, it's not modest. And so they use it. So that's how he figured out very quickly, those are girls, those are boys. He was able to determine which was which because of the apparent inherent knowledge that the girls had about what was appropriate tznius behavior. It was an interesting little story there. Okay. That really is the proof of that women do have an inherent quality of tznius based on the way God created her. But there's other reasons as well. There's also a deeper reason that relates to the elevated status that women hold in Judaism. We've talked very much about women's special quality of bina. Bina being translated as insight, intuition, deeper, an ability to think on a deeper level. It's connected in a way to an idea of tznius because it means going beneath the surface of things. And if we are viewed externally, if we don't have that quality of tznius, then we're stripped of that ability of bina. Our bina really takes a hit. There's a very famous line from King David's Psalms. It's Kol Kvoda Bas Melech Pnima, which means that all the glory or honor of the daughter of the king is inside. And this sentence has been used to explain or prove that women have this, or illustrate that women have a very special connection to tznius. It also, however, points to the religious experience in general, that it itself is private, and in other words, that true achievement in the religious sphere is always private. The Gemara uses this sentence from Psalms to explain this through the figures of Moshe and his brother Aharon. So the Gemara says, after the tent was erected, he said, "How beautiful is tznius," and therefore he spoke to him in the tent. And so too did David say, "The entire glory of the daughter of the king lies on the inside, more so than the one who is clothed in golden garments." The daughter of the king is Moses. Okay, so the Gemara says the daughter of the king is Moshe, who's the king. He's the daughter of the king being the Torah. The one clothed in gold is Aharon, referring to his golden garments of the priest. And so the Gemara is basically equating a woman with her quality of tznius to Moshe, meaning that Moshe, his role in terms of his spiritual role, his religious role, was a private role. We talked about how when the times that he talked to God was always in private. Certainly once the Mishkan was built, he always talked to Hashem, to God, in there, as opposed to the role of Aharon, his brother, whose role was very public. He was the high priest. He had these beautiful garments to wear, and he did his work in public, in the public sphere. Moshe, on the other hand, did his work in private. He talked to God in private. He was more connected to the quality of tznius. And the Gemara is equating a woman's role, okay, her elevated role, with Moshe's elevated role. That Moshe's role was somehow superior because it was connected to tznius, just like a woman's. The Gemara doesn't make this connection to a woman, but there is that connection made. So again, women are acknowledged to be more inherently gifted in this midah and are thus encouraged to achieve in this area. Okay. All right. That basically concludes the issues of tznius as I wanted to discuss them. Should we keep the question of the wigs that Lisa brought up till next time, or should we address it now? What do you say?
No.
I should do it now? Okay.
But she wanted to hear it.
But she did want to hear it. She did say that she would watch the video. So I could address it now, and then maybe next week she could come back at me with her further challenges. So Lisa had the question of why is a wig considered a modest thing? Because a lot of the wigs you see today look even better than what would be a woman's natural hair. Okay, so there's a few answers to this. First of all, let's remember that tznius is not about looking ugly, right? It's about keeping certain parts of oneself private. It's about keeping certain parts of your body off limits for public consumptions. These are the parts that are considered erva, nakedness in a woman, and the hair of a married woman is one of them. So the question, therefore, of the attractiveness of wigs is really not really the issue. It's not, if I'm allowed to look attractive, right, then I can have a pretty wig on. It's not about hiding beauty, it's about keeping private parts private and off limits for public consumption. The Torah says a married woman's hair is considered nakedness. Therefore, if I cover it with something nice, it's fine. I'll give you an analogy. There's lots of women whose thighs are full of varicose veins and cellulite. They look awful, and they look much better covered with a skirt. Does that mean that that is also not allowed? No, of course, we're not saying that a woman can't look better than what her naked flesh would look like, right? If she wore shorts, it would be awful, and if she wears a skirt, she looks very, very nice, much nicer, right, than showing her varicose veins. We're also not saying that she shouldn't do that. Covering the skirt makes her look nicer, but that's fine. It's just about leaving the bare body, the parts of the bare body that are supposed to be private. Another analogy would be wearing, let's say, a shirt whose sleeves are flesh-colored, right? So that would be another analogy, because on the one hand, you'd say, well, the flesh-colored shirt looks like the flesh underneath it, just the way that a wig looks like hair underneath it. But again, it's not about how attractive or not attractive it looks. It's about covering the nakedness of the body. It's about keeping the body parts private. So that's one way of answering that, okay? This, again, because it's only an issue of covering the hair, that's the issue. So most poskim, most halachic decisors say that a wig is fine, okay? There were some Rebbeim that even said that their wigs are preferable. The Lubavitcher Rebbe and Reb Moshe said that wigs are preferable. The Lubavitcher Rebbe preferred a wig to a scarf, let's say, because he felt that it covers more of the hair. With a scarf, you have the possibility of some hair sticking out, which, okay, if it happens, it's okay, but it shouldn't. You should try to obviously cover it up as much as possible. So he preferred wigs to scarves. And then, however, now here's another answer. There are some rabbis that say wigs are not appropriate. Certainly not today, because in the Gemara's time, the Gemara says wigs are fine. The Halacha says wigs are fine. And even in the days of the Gemara, they had something called a wig that was made to look like hair. The problem, however, and this is what Lisa's addressing here, is that the best looking wig in the times of the Gemara was worse, obviously, was not as natural looking or not as beautiful as the worst of today's wigs. Okay, today's wigs are made from human hair. They're made from, they have beautiful styles, they have beautiful textures. They're handmade. They're really stunning wigs. As a result, there are rabbis today who, most notably in Eretz Yisrael, not so many in America. In Eretz Yisrael and Israel, you have rabbis that have come out and said today's wigs are not appropriate, or they've said, well, you can wear a wig, but it should look like a wig, not real hair. And again, the idea behind that is, if it's too alluring, if I can look at you and all I see is beautiful hair, even if you're covered, so then there's an issue. Again, it falls into the category of attracting versus attractive. Okay, so if it's a wig that's going, and again, as I said, this applies with any way a person presents themselves: makeup, hair, jewelry, clothing, colors, clothing styles, shoes, fur coats, whatever it is. If it's going to be attracting my eye versus looking nice and refined and attractive, and it's again such a hard thing to put your finger on, but it's that's the difference basically. So there are rabbis who've come out and said they're not really permitted because they look like human hair and they look very attracting. If it's clear that it's a wig, then it's okay, and if now.
How about this with a little sign, wig?
Say again? Little sign. Right. Okay, so again, that's basically what it is. So strictly speaking, is it okay to wear a wig? Yeah, because the issue is covering up the part of me that the Torah says is not supposed to be seen. Does that answer the question? I hope that answers. We'll have to see from Lisa. Yes.
Well, I had another little spin on it
Mm-hmm.
for a married woman. I think that when you wear that wig, it's a reminder to a woman, just like a yarmulke is a reminder to a man.
Mm-hmm.
Of the presence of God,
Mm-hmm.
and also the concept that now I'm a married woman,
Mm-hmm.
I need to act like a married woman.
Right. You're absolutely right in that. The wig for a woman, a married woman, serves the purpose of reminding her as well that I am now, there's a certain part of me that is now, whereas before I was okay to present certain parts of me to the world, now I belong to one, and that there are parts of me that are not okay to present, in an attracting way anymore. So absolutely, and you're right to compare it in a way to men's head covering, to a yarmulke, to a tallis, to those kinds of things. They're similar in this way. I see the men's head covering as a corollary to tznius. I say corollary because it's not really an issue of tznius. They don't cover their hair, obviously, but the point of the yarmulke is to remind men something above them. In that way, the purpose is to instill humility. Humility is a corollary to tznius. Right? Humility means that I need to be aware of something above me. I need to be aware that it's not just about me. I need to be aware, therefore, of God's presence on top of me, but also in my life as well. That is the goal of tznius as well. In other words, that to focus on the inside, right, means that I'm focusing on the hidden part of this world, the hidden part of God's presence in the world. And if you're focused on externals, you can't access that deeper layer of existence. So in a way, it's a corollary. Yes, I agree with you. Yeah. All right. I think I covered it all. Did you want me to talk about, Layra, did you want me to talk about your daughter's question?
Yeah,
You did? Absolutely. So Chava Esther had the question of, remind me, do you remember exactly what it was? I remember. Okay. So I think it was something about why in the frum communities, the dress is very uniform. Was that it? Something like that? No? Okay, well, I prepared an answer on the basis of that kind of question. The question would be, why does it seem like so many frum people dress the same or dress alike? Right? I think that was big. That was something of what she was talking about. So there are a few answers to that. Number one is that we all have, every human being has a public self and a private self. All of us, no matter who we are, no matter what background we come from, no matter what religious group or not religious group, we belong to a community of public as well as private. And we, as a result, public life requires compromising some of your individuality in order to unite with other people. If you think about community membership in various groups, I don't know, a sports team, a school, a profession. If you go into a hospital, all the nurses are dressed alike. On a sports team, they're all dressed alike. Certain members of certain professions dress in a very similar way. In certain professions, they're all dressed in suits, right? Even in more bohemian sense, you can think about, the way you can identify on the street an actor, let's say, or a certain type of person, even a teenager who wants to be an iconoclast and look different from everybody, looks exactly like his peers, right? In an ironic way, they all look the same at the same time that they're trying to look different because they all have the similar haircut, or they have a nose ring, or they have a body piercing of some kind. So they all have the sense of, I want to look like my peers. In a similar way, we have so this is like a normal, healthy part of being part of a community. In a similar way, I think Orthodox Jews as well tend to, gravitate towards We want to look like each other. We want to identify, we want to self-identify as I'm a part of this group. Okay, now let me address, the second answer is addressing the what some have called, what some might call the frum or the Orthodox uniform of, if you see, in other words, if you can identify a yeshiva guy on the street. You can identify a frum man on the street. He's dressed in a suit and a tie and sometimes a hat, right? So you might ask, well, what's this all about? And I think that might be also what she was asking about. So the interesting thing is that this style of dress that the Orthodox Jews wear really began in previous centuries, during the Enlightenment, in the 19th century actually. The secular Jews used to look down on the yeshiva boys, the yeshiva guys, and make fun of them. And there was a rabbi named Rabbi Nosson Tzvi Finkel. He was called the Alter of Slobodka, the grandfather of Slobodka. He wanted to raise morale. He wanted to encourage his students. He wanted to raise their self-confidence and their self-esteem and their prestige even. So he encouraged them to wear clothing that basically were considered at the time professional and stylish, which was the short jacket, suit jacket, as opposed to a long, I guess they had been wearing a long coat. So they adopted the style of a short jacket, a tie, a hat, a stylish hat. It wasn't the fedora that you see now. He used to wear a top hat, actually, a silk top hat. He used to wear bowlers, cane and glasses, very, stylish striped pants, things like that. And this was how professional people as well as secular students used to dress, and he wanted his yeshiva boys to feel important. He wanted them to feel stylish. He wanted them to feel of a certain value, and this really fit with his moral system, which emphasized the human greatness in a human being. We talked about the idea of being a child of God, and to dress the part of somebody who is professional, who is stylish, who is attractive, who looks like they're put together well. So this is where it all originated. Okay. Now, through history, let's go down a century or so. We find it's interesting because if you look at pictures of, let's say, a group scene, an outdoor scene of we have men and women together in the 30s or 40s, if you ever see a picture, you'll notice that every person, man and woman, to a person, is wearing a hat. You would never imagine going out dressed without a hat. There was a certain formality in the way people used to dress. All right, we gradually over time lost that formality. Interestingly enough, I think it's JFK, President Kennedy, who's attributed to some of that decline, I should say, because at his inauguration, he did not wear a hat, and this was a tremendous step away from what everybody else had been doing. In fact, if you look at a picture of him at his inauguration, he's hatless, and all the other men sitting there watching have silk top hats on. Very interesting. So he's attributed with relaxing that standard. And of course, we know as the world has continued on, the standards have continued to relax to the point at which you see people walking on the street today in their pajamas. You do, right? So, but meanwhile, what did we do? The Jewish community, from the Orthodox yeshiva boys, kept that formality of dress. So it's not that now we look a little bit odd, but why? It's not that we are the odd ones. It's that the rest of the society, the secular society, relaxed its standards to the point at which everybody's wearing jeans and t-shirt, and we kept the formality of going out with a hat on and looking like professionals. So that's really, you have to consider that's what happened. It's not that, that we're out of step with the world. It's that the world is now out of step because it's relaxed its standards. Okay, and then the final reason is that we're always encouraged to not follow the styles of the non-Jews. We have a mitzvah in the Torah that says, "V'chukaseihem lo telechu." Don't follow their, meaning the Gentiles' way of doing things. And we have always prided ourselves on looking different from, and we discussed the idea of not chasing after, the fashion, the latest fashions. I said it was okay. We have the idea that it's okay to dress nicely and even in style, but the idea of running out to get the latest trend in shirts or whatever it would be is not something we pride ourselves on doing. In fact, this pride of separatism in style goes back to when we were in Egypt, slaves in Egypt, and it says that one of the things that the Jews were praised for in Egypt was that they kept their clothing styles, that they kept their names, their language, and their clothing. So we've always had this sense of we're going to look different because we want to be different in a good way. And we want to retain an identity that is different from the world at large. And so that's it. I think that sums it up. That we have now. Does this mean that do I have to follow the exact styles? In other words, especially for women, it's not such an issue. We don't have a uniform, if you want to call it that. The way that there isn't as much of a formality in the way of dressing as there would be for men. Right, who have adopted the black hat and the short the suit jackets and the ties. So it's not as much of an issue. But I think that you think that will give her?
Another thing that I came across is that part of what you said is the custom of the place.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard a speaker, Jefferson Heller, saying, it seems to me that she said that the custom of the place isn't in this part of Jewish society according to the location, but rather according to affiliation.
Right.
So if a person, asks their questions of a Yeshiva rabbi, that's who they ask the questions of, then their place is to dress similar to Yeshiva society. The family asks their questions of a shul rabbi, an Orthodox shul rabbi, and their place